Assembly. So I am Kate Wardin, and I'll be talking through people first leadership today. So the first thing I like to do is make it a little bit interactive. So I promise this will be one of my only interactive questions, but I just want to pose to the audience, why are you here? Why did this topic resonate with you? Are you a current leader right now, or why are you interested in this talk tonight? Anyone? Yeah, please. Yeah, so thinking about getting into leadership. Are you in the technology space right now?
No.
Okay, so thinking about getting into tech.
From the ground.
Yes, that's awesome. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm a developer, and I've been told by my parents who were in tech that at some point you have to differentiate between technical and people. Whether or not that's true, I find myself starting to go towards the people side of that.
That's awesome. Okay, so developer kind of looking into and I think, you can never go wrong looking to the people side of software development. Like that is one of my key messages. So regardless of if you're going to stay on that developer path, get into, the lead principal levels, like you have to know those people skills regardless. So awesome. Good for you for coming. Okay, so I made you do it, and now I will. So I'm going to talk to you today about why I am here and why I love talking about this subject of people first leadership. Okay, so there's 3 reasons why I'm here. The first one is my mom, so she is, the reason I'm on planet Earth today. But we were talking when I first became a boss a couple years ago, we were talking about how surprised she was that I got into this field, and specifically into management. She's like, it's doesn't really seem to fit your personality. Like you're definitely not one to be super bossy, and these were the types of bosses that she had in the past. And so I started really second guessing myself, like, oh my gosh, should I get into management? Like, am I going to be a good manager? Am I going to be a good leader? I'm not really fitting that mold that people like my mom expect. And so I started doing some research, and I found that this wasn't uncommon. It's really important to be great leaders. There's a awesome quote here that says, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. It's true with my mom. She's had some really horrible examples with bosses. It's true with others. I'm sure some of you have had some really bad bosses in the past that just rubs you the wrong way when you think about the word boss even. Okay, so as I mentioned, I was doing some studying, and I found a 2017 Gallup engagement study that showed that actually 50% of respondents have left a job to get away from their manager at some point in their career. And this is actually a study of 27 million different employees in 2.5 million different countries. 2.5 million different teams in almost 200 different countries. So it's a truly, really global issue. And so what I found fascinating as I'm, traveling the world and giving this talk to people, like everyone seems to resonate with this problem. Okay, so the second reason why I'm here is that I know that engineers are picky when choosing where to work these days. So looking at our industry specifically, if we look at this year, there's going to be about 70,000 people graduating with software development, undergraduate or boot camps, or just getting into this career of software development. But then, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Projections data, there's going to be 700,000 different openings for these software developers to get into jobs. So if you do the math, that's about 10 times the amount of open roles versus qualified candidates for these roles. And so I know that as organizations, we really are going to have competition as we try to really recruit these awesome developers. We know they're going to have so many different choices on where to work, especially in the Minneapolis market. And so we have to figure out, how do we stand out as organizations and not only hire people, but also retain them and make sure that they're happy within our organizations. Especially knowing that retention rates are at an all-time low. So they say that 1 in 4 workers will quit this year. So this was back in 2019, and this is actually going to get even lower. So 1 in 3 people are going to quit their job in 2020 for whatever reason. And they say, in software development specifically, people are leaving their roles after 2 to about 2.5 years. So I'm just coming to realize, we really can't afford to ignore this as organizations. $11 billion is lost annually due to people leaving, and they say that 75% of these causes are actually preventable. So, in my opinion, by being really great leaders and great bosses to these people. Okay, so my third reason is that I've worked with several other managers, and honestly, including myself, just really struggle with that psychological and emotional shift from being an individual contributor to suddenly like leading a group of people. And I tell people like it's an absolute career change when you're a software engineer to when you go to leading other humans, you know, full time. Like that's an absolute career change. And I find that a lot of people don't really get that formal training and those skill sets and the practice to be great people leaders. There's no tools or training or like a 90-day plan in a lot of organizations. Some do have that, but a majority really don't yet. In fact, as I was researching this, I saw that about 40% of new engineering leaders actually do receive training, so it's getting better, but that's still the majority of people not getting training when they're making this really, really big career shift. Okay, so to recap the 3 reasons why I'm here, those are, 50% of people are leaving their jobs due to bad managers. We know that engineers have a lot of options when choosing where to work. And then we have this lack of training for those new leaders to really be confident and effective in their roles. Okay, so an agenda for tonight. We're gonna go through why are we talking about this, which is already done. I'm gonna talk through what is people first leadership and how did I get this name, developer first leadership, specifically for technical teams. And then what are some techniques that you can apply to your teams, regardless of if you're in an official people management position. All right, second interactive question. Tell me about the worst leader that you've ever had. Just use adjectives to describe these people.
Belittling.
Belittling, yeah.
Sexist and racist.
Sexist and racist. Oh my gosh, yeah. Any others? Bully. Oh, yeah, so I think, it goes to show just like how powerful this is and how, each of us, even if you didn't shout something else, like have heard a story or just have that personal story of having a really bad boss and how that impacted, those 40 hours that you spent at work each week. Okay, and so now I like to talk about like why do bosses even get a bad rap in the first place? Like why was my mom so shocked when I was like, oh, I kind of want to get into people leadership. So let's unpack this. I think a lot of things naturally stem from the media that we're exposed to, especially if we don't get that formal training. We just kind of try to emulate what we've seen, right? It's kind of like parenting too. So there's those degrading leaders, they're task givers, they're intimidating, they're the Bill Lumbergs of the world, or they're just like relentlessly cruel and cold. And so like I said, if you don't have that formal training and that practice and that support, you're just going to emulate what you've seen and what you're used to, as horrible as it might be. And then there's a lot of admirable tech companies who are taking strong stances by seeing what happens when they just completely remove managers and flatten their organizations. So I think that's another reason people are like, wait, do we even need managers, And then lastly, I think we sometimes promote our best engineers who probably shouldn't be people leaders. I strongly believe that you can apply technical skills to a lot of different industries, but it's really hard, like I said, just to go, day 1 you're an engineer to day 2 you're, leading people. It's truly going from like computer science to people science. It's a huge difference. And so, if you're not in an engineering position right now, I also like to say, the skills that made you an awesome, whatever your role is, are not necessarily going to make you a great manager of those people, right? And so I love this quote from the VP of People Operations at Google. So he says that, we always believed that to be a manager, you need to be as deep or deeper in technical expert that the people who work for you. And it turns out that's absolutely the least important thing. Much more important is just making that connection and being accessible. And so this is a really, really cool study. If you haven't read about it, it's called Project Oxygen. And it's where Google actually also flattened their organization and then studied, what happened and what did those, what were people missing? And then they asked people like, what do you miss in having a boss? Okay, so we could just give up, and now I'm going to reference that same study to kind of walk through some of Google's lessons that they learned from their, they call it a failed quest, which I really appreciate. So they wrote an article about what they learned from flattening this one of their organizations. And just kind of to sum it up, they said, without managers, they found that people were left searching for basic answers to questions and needs, as well as guidance in important areas such as career advice. Right? Like some kind of vital, like just 101 things that you need to feel confident doing your job every day. Okay, so in my opinion, I think managers are probably here to stay. So that's great for myself and for other people who might pursue this role or are already in these roles. So now I just want to hear about like, what are some great leaders you've had? If any, has anyone had one? Yeah? Smart? What was that?
Engaged.
Engaged?
Optimistic.
Optimistic? So like present and yeah. Appreciative, yeah. That's necessary, especially we work so hard. Okay, so hearing these responses about those bad and those great leaders that we've had, what I've realized in doing this talk dozens of times is that we really do need to think differently about leadership, and especially about technical leadership. So looking back at these problems, I've outlined, how are we going to solve these? I think we're going to have to develop really awesome leaders. It seems really straightforward, but it's not. We're going to have to make sure that we're fostering irresistible cultures. And then we're going to have to make sure that we're also equipping leaders with tools, actionable frameworks, and confidence to be effective leaders in their organization. So I've started testing out some of these ideas and tools and helping other leaders do the same. And I've already seen some really great results personally on my team. So just kind of comparing to like the national averages for both engagement and retention, just seeing my team kind of spike up in those has been really, really exciting as I try out some of these new techniques. All right, so I'm super excited to share some of these ideas with you and just what this methodology of people-first leadership really means. So it's actually quite simple. And to me, it just means that I work for my team and not the other way around, right? So it's the people first and not the manager first. Okay, so how do we do this? I'm going to walk you through 7 different ways to practice this people-first leadership starting tomorrow. So I'm really hoping to get some tactical ways that you guys can implement, as soon as you get back to your work. Again, regardless of if you're in an official, people leadership role. Okay, so the first one is to remove blockers that prevent people from making progress towards their professional and personal goals. So I think that, as a leader of people, one of your most important goals in your role is to really enable the developers to be as productive as possible. Like it's kind of like that Scrum Master role if you've had those on your teams. But I think that's also essential of that leadership role as well. So to me, that means in all of my one-on-ones, I'm just collecting a list of things that I can help my team members with and not the other way around. And so by the end of the day, I have this long list of things that I'm helping them with, whether it's connecting them with someone else on a team that they have to work with, helping them get proper skill sets or tutorials that they need to, be confident doing their jobs, or also maybe finding them opportunities to grow in a new skill set on a new team that they're interested in. And honestly, in my one-on-ones, it's been as simple as just changing the way that I'm phrasing questions. So I say, what can I help you with instead of, do you have an update on, whatever they're working on? And I think onboarding is super, super vital in quote, removing blockers. There's so many hidden blockers that come up if you don't have effective onboarding tools in place and documentation and processes. You all know how painful it is to show up to a job and you don't have a laptop or the processes aren't set up, so it just feels like if people aren't prepared for you to start, it just feels very unproductive. So some of the things I like to do right off the bat is just make sure you're discussing roles and responsibilities, here's what I expect of you, here's what you should expect of me, are we on the same page? Talk about your team's way of working, so we work remote this amount of days, or our core working hours are this. Also make sure you're providing an overview of those key partners that person might have to work with. Whether it's a team that works on the back-end services that you're consuming, maybe it's the customers of your product, maybe it's other people who consume your services. Who are those stakeholders that this person should be aware of and connect with right away? I also like to make sure that people have, not only a peer buddy, but also a mentor. So the mentor is that person who is hopefully guiding them from a technical perspective, and that peer buddy is just someone they can go to for any question, more of a friend. They can't feel embarrassed to go to them and ask them something. Again, I help them build their initial social network at the company. So say, here are the people you should, start meeting with. So GTKY is target lingo for get to know you. So, providing them with a list of those people who they might want to meet with right off the bat. And then I also like to make sure I ask the person, what do you prefer for a welcome celebration? Some people don't want a happy hour. Some people don't want anything. So I'm do you want some donuts? Do you just want an acknowledgement in Slack that you've joined the team? What does great look like to you as we welcome you to the team? Also, comprehensive tech onboarding is a must. We're still working on this a lot, but make sure you, if possible, get all those access requests in, get the laptop set up if possible. Again, there's nothing worse than showing up and being ready to code and you just can't do anything, don't even have a laptop. So, if feasible, try to get ahead a lot of those to really reduce those blockers as a manager on the team. Okay, so I've also noticed that blockers can disguise themselves as dynamics among the team, and it's your job as a leader to remove those and address those. So if you sense that there are issues, it is you are accountable to bring those up. And that's really where that interpersonal communication, those skills are really, really, really vital as a leader. And so, and this is where I really say, not every engineer really wants to be that person to say, hey, I noticed, that you didn't really respond well to this requirement. Can I help you walk through that? So I've had to do a lot of that stuff. And I really do think that as a leader of the team, you're accountable for removing those blockers in disguise. Blockers can also be low performers, and so this is absolutely one of the worst parts of the job, but it is so important as a leader of that team that you're making sure that you address these low performers, not only for that individual, just to make sure that they get into the right role that they're really going to exceed in, but also for the morale of the team. There's nothing worse than being a high performer and watching someone else on the team either just really struggle or be a low performer and not be contributing to the team as you'd expect. So on the flip side of this, I always say, you gotta let go of your superstars. And that's also one of the hardest things I've had to do is be oh my gosh, I know if I lose you, this is gonna be the worst for the team, but I need to make sure that you're getting those experiences that are gonna help you grow as an engineer. As I mentioned earlier, people are staying on teams for about 2 to 2.5 years. And so instead of losing them to the market, I just wanna make sure I'm finding them an opportunity within our organization to make sure that they're thriving there. And still also, expanding their skill sets and learning about new business operations and things that they're really passionate about. So, I've seen a lot of managers hold on to their best engineers, and it's just really not in the best interest of those engineers to make sure that they're continuing to grow their skill sets. Okay, so we got through number one. Number two is to really empower your team. So, we do a survey called Best Team Survey at Target, where it's basically feedback upwards. And so we always talk about, one of the things that always pops is to make sure that, the people who are at the right levels with the right level of information are the ones to actually take part in those types of decisions. And so this is one of the quotes that I saw is that, it's really just empowering to feel like something is being done to us instead of us in the driver's seat for some of these big conversations and big decisions. So, I'm sure you can relate, you've been, on the front lines and you're finding that there's these leaders making decisions that are impacting you, and you're I really wish I had a say or at least some feedback on this type of decision that's being made. Has anyone ever heard of the iceberg of ignorance? It's a 1980s business term, but I think it's so effective and so true. So I brought the numbers a little bit bigger here so you can read them. But it basically shows that, only 4% of the problems are actually known to top managers, whereas, 9% of the problems are known to maybe middle management because they're a little bit closer to the front line and those actual problems that are really, really costly. And then obviously, 100% of the actual problems are known to frontline employees. So it just seems kind of obvious to me, let's actually go to those people who know the most about these problems and get their insight, get their feedback as we try to address these problems that are costing our organizations money. Okay, so how do we melt the iceberg as a leader of a team? I think it has to do a lot with humility. So we really, really have to be humble as leaders. So ways that I do this are to, number one, make sure that you're seeking input to understand the pain points of your development team. So I like to ask, what is enjoyable that we should be doing more of? Try to use anonymous pulse surveys if it's feasible at your organization. Keep your office door open, metaphorically if you sit with the team or, if you're remote, make sure that you are really approachable to address as a leader. Sit with the team if it's feasible. Ask the engineers how you can help them, do their jobs better. And then also do exit, they're more stay interviews, we call them, do an exit interview before they exit the company. So, ask if you were to leave for one reason tomorrow, what would it be? And let's try to fix that before, you were to leave. Okay, so when we're just thinking about these different types of decisions, I always like to say, who should participate in making this decision? Like, let's be really explicit here and think about who is going to actually have to carry out the results of this decision and who's going to be impacted by this decision. Awesome quote by Steve Jobs, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do. And I think this is absolutely and even more so applicable in technology. Like, there is no way I can keep up to date on all the new technical trends when I'm leading a group of people. And so that's why I hire them. That's why I hire really, really amazing software developers to do just that and tell us what to do, right? Okay. So another thing in empowering your team is to wait for conversations to play out. And I've seen this to be really, really challenging, especially for those who were engineers and then got promoted up into management or just moved to management on the same team, because they know exactly, or they think they know exactly, how to move forward in all these difficult decisions. And so I tell people, wait for the conversation to play out, because this is, about the team now. You're the leader and you shouldn't be making all the decisions. Like, you need to let the team do that. So I found that, this is really, really challenging for those who were recently engineers, and especially on that same team. But we do really want to make sure that the team is coming up with those solutions. And lastly here, make sure that your team members know that they can disagree with you, even if you do offer your insight on something. So don't hold those ideas sacred that maybe you made decisions in the past. Try not to hold emotional attachment to those too, so that it can be really approachable if they do want to pivot and head in another direction as the team. Has anyone read Multipliers, the book? Yeah, super awesome. I love that book. So yeah, Liz Wiseman, if you haven't read it, it's a really, really awesome book about kind of the, empowerment and being a more empowering leader. So she talks about multipliers versus diminishers and these different types of leadership. And so multipliers, you're really trying to multiply, the brilliance around you, whereas diminishers are actually, decreasing that because you're always the one to offer up your opinion. And so she says, multipliers get more from their people because they are leaders who look beyond their own genius and focus their energy on extracting and extending the genius of others. So you really, really need to work to be a multiplier, and also just become aware of that if you are showing those diminishing habits. So if you are getting into the details a lot, just try to get out, which is, I can attest, really, really hard sometimes. Okay, so sometimes it's impossible to push these things to the team, and that's totally understandable. But here's where it's just really important to provide context. So for me, that's just meant like, okay, how do I provide context to the team? Like, okay, we just have to work on this business feature instead of addressing some tech debt because of financial reasons, or we're in a contract. But absolutely, if anything, make sure that you tell them how their work ties into the bigger picture. And then on the flip side, like, it's also your job to provide that context to leaders as well. So if your team just needs to address some tech debt to improve performance, tell that to leaders and be the one to share that news and say, hey, we're not going to address this business feature because we really have to address this tech debt, and here's why you care about it. I also think that leaders are great simplifiers, and this is a skill that takes a lot of practice. So oftentimes you have to take, a lot of information and simplify it down to like a note card size update, whether it's to your team or to another leader. So that's one thing that really, really takes a lot of practice too. Excuse me. So I do a weekly team huddle just to try to get a bunch of information, as concisely as possible out to my team, and also just have a place for them to come to me with questions. And so what my agenda is, and I encourage you to think about what your own agenda would be, is we start with TIL, so it stands for Today I Learned, but we do This Week I Learned. And that's really an opportunity for anyone to say like, oh, I made this huge mistake, like I feel so dumb, but I don't want you to do the same thing, and so here's what I learned from my mistake. Or it could just be something like, oh, I learned about React hooks and I want to share this cool new feature that I've been playing with you. So that's a really fun way just to get right out there, be humble, and make sure that people know that it's okay to make mistakes and talk about them. And in fact, I want people to talk about them. And then I just share things like organizational updates or context, or just clarifying our vision of the team. And then I also try to bring in guest speakers. So, Target's really big, so I want to make sure that I try to make the world even smaller for people to make those connections and understand how their work is impacting potentially other technical teams. Okay, so what I've learned is that, like, if anything, context is just so important to make sure that you're reiterating and describing the context to your team. Why are we here? Why are we building these features? What is our vision of our team? Okay, so number 3 out of 7 is share credit, take blame. So the first thing I like to talk about is to make sure that you're associating names with accomplishments. So especially at large organizations, developers can really get lost in, just the sheer amount of people at an organization. And, we talk about features when we talk about business objectives, when we talk about maybe the leader's name, but I like to really try to associate names with accomplishment when possible. So, Patrick worked on this feature which enabled this big organizational initiative. Like, try to really give the actual people the kudos. Another thing I've learned is that not all recognition looks the same. So make sure you're getting to know the members of your team, hopefully when they onboard and what they prefer for recognition. So some people don't like to be, called up in front of a big 100% all team meeting, and some people really love that. Some people just prefer that direct Slack message to say, hey, you did a really great job on this. So make sure you're really getting to know what the people on your team prefer for recognition. All right, so now the take blame piece as a leader. I think it's so important as a leader that you're making sure that you're loyal when you're recovering from ugly failures. And so at your company, hopefully you have a process to talk about if you had production incidents, and that as a leader, you're the one representing the team, unless someone really, really wants to do that on your team. But you're the one sharing what went wrong and what we learned from this. But absolutely then facilitate those learnings with your team and make sure that they know, how do we learn from this, how do we move forward from this, and that they're able to come up with those learnings as well. But you should really be the one, the face of the team during these, quote, ugly failures. Okay, so what else does your role look like as you're troubleshooting, production issues? For me, what I've found best is that, number one, I'm shielding the team as they troubleshoot. There's nothing worse than being pinged from every direction when you're working through a production issue. So I just really try to shield the developers as they're working through something. If anything, I'm saying, how can I help? What do you need? But honestly, most of the time, I'm just trying to get out of the way and just get updates to leadership, get updates to the team whenever possible. And then, like I said, make sure you're leading that team through the RCA, so the root cause analysis, to make sure they know what did we learn and how do we prevent this from happening in the future. And then, like I said, you're the one speaking on behalf of the team after major incidents. Okay, so number 4, and pretty much core to this talk, is to never devalue people in the process of delivering a solution. I care about, and you all care about, and you're accountable for, all of the solutions that we're delivering. But my job is to really enable and make sure that the people on my team are happy. And so I found that, when it comes to humans, abstraction is bad. We in software development, we're not in assembly lines. And even we are in assembly lines, we should not abstract these human characteristics. So what I found, is that what someone can produce and what someone is worth at work is a lot more complex than we can safely put numbers around. I think that value is described in, so many different ways. It's not the total number of lines of codes that you delivered. It's not, the amount of JIRA stories you've closed. It's not about the number of incidents or the lack of number of incidents that the team has. So you really got to stop calling people resources and moving them around like they are so. Like I said before, they can and they will go anywhere, so we really have to make these environments in which we're not treating people like resources. So hopefully this formula is ingrained into everyone who's worked for me before, and that's that family and personal lives come before everything else. There is no argument that I've had anyone come to me that makes this untrue. I've worked with people who have really just sacrificed everything, their lives, their sleep, their health, their family, and it's, leaders just let that happen, and that's a really scary, sacrifice, especially when you're accountable as a leader to let someone on your team go through. And so a great way, in my opinion, to use your authority as a leader is to not incentivize or award or praise someone for these scary situations. So at Target, for example, obviously we have really crazy retail season. So Black Friday, people might have to work on Thanksgiving. So we're making sure that we give people that time off to spend with their family, cover from remote if possible, so they can be with their family at home whenever they can and as soon as possible. At Target, no one's going to die because of the work we do or don't do. I know this doesn't apply to all organizations. A lot of people are in healthcare, et cetera. But, to me, on my teams, sacrificing, your personal or your family lives is not acceptable to me. Okay, and so one of my pet peeves about our culture is that one of the first things, and just myself, but when you meet someone, you're like, oh, what do you do? But I think the better question to ask, and especially if you're leading humans, is asking, who are you? And obviously that's a really awkward question to ask. So other ways to get down to that, those answers are just to like make sure you're spending some time in your one-on-ones, asking what they did in the weekend, what vacations did they go on, like are kids important to them, like what are their kids up to? Just make sure you're getting to know them on a personal level. So that is at least 1/3 of all my statuses, we just talk about that stuff. And also if you're comfortable, open up about your own personal life, because that just makes that trust a lot more feasible and easier to get at, which makes you a more effective leader. Anyone read Radical Candor? Another one of my favorite books, yeah. Okay, so Radical Candor is amazing. It like really demystifies giving feedback. So if you haven't read it, I really advise you to. But so Kim Scott says, your job is not to provide purpose, but instead get to know your direct reports well enough to understand how each one derives meaning from their work. I found that most people are honestly just like trying to balance their lives, and they're gonna feel a lot more connected to your team and your work if you bring these personal stories in. So I like to think about, like what are our expectations and what do we socialize as our expectations of these team members? What are people incentivized by? So if they are incentivized by these types of things, think about what message that's sending. What do you talk about when you do annual reviews or when you have your one-on-ones? Just think about what messages those are sending. I love this quote. So tell me how you measure me and I will tell you how I behave, right? So what are your expectations of me? And that's what I'm gonna hopefully, deliver to that team. Okay, so from a professional standpoint, sometimes it's really hard in software engineering to be like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Because like no one knows, like things are going to change so much. So I've come up with a couple resources. These are on my website just to talk through those career conversations. So you can use these with your boss, or if you are a boss, you can use these with all your team members. But I like to get really tactical about like, what are you enjoying right now? What could give you even more energy? And how do we set some goals that are like very near term? Because like who knows what the world will be like in 5 years. Okay, and the next lesson is to make sure that we're celebrating and also reaping the benefits of the unique characteristics of each individual. There are so many different studies on how important diversity and inclusion is on our development teams. I could literally talk for like an entire hour on this. And so if you're a data person, I'll give some stats quick. So 67% of job seekers consider workplace diversity an important factor when considering where to work. And more than 50% of current employees want their workplace to be more diverse. And they say that organizations with above average gender diversity and levels of employee engagement outperform companies with below average diversity and engagement by 46 to 58%. So like just logically, and if you're a financial person, like it just really makes sense to have diverse and inclusive teams. And I think it's also good to clarify, like diversity and inclusion are very, very different things. So to me, diversity is like who is at work, who do you bring to work, who do you recruit, who do you hire? And then inclusion is really how people feel once they're in their roles at work. Okay, so as leaders, we must ensure that everyone on our team is able to be their authentic selves every day without question. I found that, people are gonna bring their whole human selves to work, even if they try not to. And I don't want them to try not to. Like it is so draining to not bring your whole human self to work. And instead of spending energy on trying to not be yourself, I want you spending energy on building awesome technology, right? Okay, so I do think that there are some attributes where diversity doesn't make sense, and I'll talk through some of those now. So the first one is values. If your values don't align to the organization or the team that you're working on, it's gonna be really hard, like I said. You're gonna be really, really drained trying to figure out why you're here, and am I really bought into this vision and where we're going? The next one is work ethic. So I only hire really motivated, really curious people. Obviously, sometimes you have your off days, but I need your on days to be, an extraordinary work ethic. And then there's attitude. I don't hire people with bad attitudes that are gonna bring the other, members of the team down. And then past failures. I need you to talk about and be really open about those past failures so that we can avoid them in the future. We can save a lot of money if we don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. All right, so the next lesson in being a people-first leader is to be vulnerable and authentic. And so the first thing here is to, lead by example. So talk about your own stories of struggle. Talk about those times you failed and what you learned and how other people can learn from you so that you can make sure that they're also comfortable to share those stories as well. Along the lines of authenticity, I was shocked to learn that this is my dad's profile picture on LinkedIn. So he's a consultant, he's been in the industry for, 40 plus years. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how do you ever get a job? Like, you're working with recruiters all the time. Like, how do you ever get employed? And he's like, people aren't going to take you seriously. And he's like, I don't care. Like, I only want to work for organizations that can handle my sense of humor and then embrace it and then, take me as a person as I am. And that's really, really stuck with me. And I tell everyone I work with, that same message, especially seeing these stats on it's 10 times the amount of open roles. Like, go work somewhere where you can be who you are. Be that authentic leader. The next one is prioritize and focus. And I'm sorry, this one will be a little bit more dry and boring. But time management skills I found are the number one thing that first-time leaders really need to improve on, because it's absolutely impossible when you become a manager and you're not a maker anymore and your schedule is just what just happened to my calendar. You have one-on-ones, you have meetings with other teams, you're trying to remove blockers, maybe you're still coding, you're writing performance reviews, it's absolutely impossible. So you really, really have to make sure you have strong time management skills. And a lot of that takes focus. So when asked what the key to their success was, both Bill Gates and Warren Buffett said that focus was their number one skill. Like I said, we are so bombarded with distracting ideas, information, people pinging you. We really got to figure out what we need to focus on any given minute. And so I say that, the number one skill you need as a leader is the ability to know what really matters at any given moment and focus on that. Whether that's people on your team that need help, maybe it's a business partner who's screaming and really needs your attention. What relationships do you have to strengthen? What's on fire right now? What is important to focus on? Okay, so some tips. Stop multitasking on the important things. It causes a 10% drop in IQ, and it leads to as much as 40% drop in productivity. So obviously there's a time and a place to multitask, but for those really, really important things, just try to avoid it. Studies show that the human brain actually can't handle more than one task at a time. We're actually just simultaneously switching back and forth really rapidly between two. So we're actually truly single-threaded people. So don't try to have that really important one-on-one conversation on the phone, while you're responding to an email, or write a performance review while you're watching The Office. Just avoid multitasking with those really, really important things. Okay, so another useful tool when you have just a pile of to-dos, however big or small they might be, is to use the Eisenhower matrix. And so this allows you to organize things into what's not important versus important, and then what's urgent and not urgent. And I love how the bottom right one just says don't ever do that, which is so, just get it out of your mind. Stop thinking about it. Okay, so again, stop signing up for so much thing. Think about your purpose. Think about what your focus is. Know that when you're saying yes to something, you are saying no to something else. You're putting your energy thinking about those things that you probably will never do. Put your energy onto those things that are actually important and urgent. Another thing that I love to walk people through is to audit yourself. So look at your calendar the past 2 weeks and look at what you're spending your time on. So I have this worksheet here where I have people actually do little pie charts of, here's where I'm spending my time. Here's my ideal distribution of time. Here's how I would show to my boss, and I'd be really proud of here's how I split up my time. So make sure that you're auditing yourself and also adjust when needed. Okay, so the last thing is to make sure that you're always investing more and more and more into your communication skills, because this is so vital as a leader, especially in today's world. A lot of people are working remote. We got to be excellent communicators to save time and, make sure that people are happy at work. So this was a struggle for me, but one of the things I learned right away is just to stop talking. When I first started my role, I would be really, really drained, preparing for my one-on-ones. Okay, I want an agenda. I'm gonna ask them all these questions, and when I'd get to them, I'd be oh my gosh, this isn't about me. This is about you. We need to talk about what's important to you at any given time, and not about me. So that's my first piece of advice: is as a leader, just stop talking and let the other person, talk and share what's on their mind at that time. And yeah, so one-on-ones in general are hard. I think for both parties, they're kind of awkward, they're kind of forced, but they're so, so vital to our roles. So don't avoid them. Don't avoid them with your boss, or if you are a boss, don't avoid them with your team members. Because we do have them for a reason. And there's a reason why there's a ton of books and articles about, the vital importance of one-on-ones. Okay, so in my opinion, we have one-on-ones for several reasons. The number one is just to take a pulse on how that person is doing and to uncover those potential issues or those, blockers in disguise, as I talked about before. We also have to make sure that we're fostering trust with each member of our team. We're gaining alignment, so we're able to say okay, here's why we're doing this. Does it all make sense? Ask questions, etc. We're giving feedback, on a recurring basis. We're hopefully giving career direction and discussing where they want to go. We're providing context if needed. Then we're also understanding just how are you thinking and feeling right now. So some general tips, hopefully they're regularly scheduled. I do a minimum every other week for 30 minutes each person. They're rarely missed or moved if possible. And again, like I said, they're focused on the team member. So some questions I like to ask just to get the conversation going right away is, what's on your mind? And I like this one because it says, let's talk about what's most important to you at this very moment, this week, this day, what's on your mind? I've actually never had anyone surprisingly say nothing, except my husband. I sometimes ask this question to him, but no team member, even the most, introverted people are like, oh yeah, I've actually been thinking about this. So I love this very powerful question. It seems awkward at first, but just get in the routine of asking this question. Another thing I like to say is, say more. Even if I think I understand, just say more, because I think context and details matter so much. So getting people to elaborate and talk more, talk through their thoughts can be really powerful for both people. And then I always end with, how can I help this week? What can I do for you? I love this one because you're forcing them to make a clear and direct request of what they need from you, and you're not assuming what they need. So, I think a lot of our time is spent doing things that we assume people need and not what they actually need. So yeah, just to wrap up, I think leaders don't provide the answers, they ask great questions. So I also have another worksheet of great one-on-one questions. I've had people literally bring this to their sessions, make it less awkward. So I'll share a link out to those as well. But yeah, as a leader, just make sure that you're actually listening to people. Listen without distractions. Don't bring your laptop, don't bring your cell phone. Even if it's just there, the presence of it, I think, is just distracting for both people. Everyone's had that meeting where you feel like someone just really isn't mentally present. Maybe they're literally checking their laptop or looking at their phone. And I think that's, super disrespectful. So I will even call people out and be like, hey, is there a better time that you want to talk about this important thing? And on the other side too, I've had one-on-ones where I'm like, hey, I am not mentally present. I am going through this really hard time. Do you mind if we meet, in an hour when I can kind of decompress and, be really present with you? So just to recap here, people are your most important assets. They're every single organization's most important assets. And so when you put it that way, our jobs as leaders is super, super vital. And so we do have to be tenaciously committed to the growth of each individual on our team. And so my commitment is to make sure that I am helping anyone who wants help to be the best leader that they can for their teams, so that we can solve these problems, right? So we can have 0 people leaving due to bad managers. We can have our organizations standing out as preferred places to work, and that we can require training for new leaders who are making this huge career shift. So I invite you to join the movement. Check out my website. I have some workshops coming up that are very, very hands-on for new leaders. And then also the June 2020 Minneapolis Tech Leadership Conference. Love to see you there. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah, are you cool with answering?
Yeah. If anyone has any.
What's your approach with delivering tough messages?
Delivering tough messages timely, so do it as soon as possible. I like to share if possible, my unfiltered or filtered opinion. So if it's a message coming, from upper level leadership, say, here is just how we have to move forward. I support you and I want to hear your thoughts and concerns about this particular decision. So try to gather feedback, but if it's something that, we can't change, just say here is how it is. Here's how we're going to move forward. I will lead you through this. I will support you through this. Yeah, but definitely rip off the Band-Aid. Just do it right away.
Recommendations on what people can bring to their one-on-ones as not the leader? So you obviously have these a lot, and
Yeah.
some people are having one-on-ones with managers and aren't really sure what to bring to the table.
Yeah. So the question was as an individual contributor, what types of conversations, how can I start a conversation in a one-on-one, and what things do I bring? Yeah, so I like to talk, or like when people say like, here's something I really enjoyed about this week, here's something that really challenged me this week, here's a skill set that I've started to learn, or maybe here's a skill set that I want to learn. Those are kind of the key topics I like to walk through, or if someone were to bring me that would be awesome. Yeah.
Any tips for remote workers?
Yeah.
Check-ins and things like that.
Yeah. So if possible, especially if there's even one person who is remote on a team, I like to make sure that the culture of the whole team acts as remote. So like make sure that there's those like water cooler talks like in a Slack or like HipChat, whatever you use, that's visible to that remote person, so they don't feel left out and missing, you know, key updates, especially if there's like a decision that was made in the hallway or in person. I like to say like, oh, hey, will you go recap that because, you know, this person is remote. Just type it out, and then that person can also participate and say, oh, I want to talk more about that. Video calls are super, super essential, like to be able to see the person. I'm trying to think, yeah, my past team, we had several remote team members, and it's really, really about communicating well and making sure that it's like a fair culture that is accessible for everyone to read just in one place, and you try to reduce the amount of decisions made in person. Yeah, and then also like if it's possible to like do, you know, social events, so like if stand-up's everyone on, you know, a video and not just like one person and then everyone kind of sitting around, you know, a microphone. So try to get everyone on one video, if possible. Yeah, yeah, it's hard, it's really hard, especially when only one person is remote and the rest of the team is, you know, physically together. Any other questions? Yeah.
What have you learned in doing this presentation?
What have I learned in doing this presentation? I've learned that it's a global issue. Like a lot of people resonate with, hey, I just became a boss and I thought I was prepared because I was a really, really great engineer, but now I'm totally in over my head. I don't know how to give feedback. Like I don't know how to write a review. I've learned like that this really resonates with people. Yeah, and I always, you know, tweak and try to, you know, update my slides to figure out what additional challenges people tell me that they face as well in different types of organizations. Yeah. But yeah, I think like your first question about delivering hard messages is also a topic that I want to dig into more, because I've had some practice, but not, you know, fortunately not a ton. So that's one thing I want to continue learning about. Yeah.
Cool, well, thank you,
Yeah,
Kate.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
All three of us will be around for the next, 10-15 minutes if anyone has any questions. Like I said, Kate's going to be teaching a workshop next Thursday. We do have 3 intro classes coming up as well, and then a couple other paid workshops, and I'll send a follow-up email, just kind of recapping all of that for you all. But I'm grateful that you were able to be here, and I hope that you come to another General Assembly event in the near future. And obviously stay warm, drive safely, all of those Minnesota things as well.
Yeah.
But thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being
Yeah,
here.
thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Today.